So today, welcome to our podcast. Today our topic is why Western intellectuals are obsessed about Dugin. And our guest is Bryan. I think Bryan is the great specialist in Dugin or an expert. He denies this. So Bryan, can you say a little bit about yourself?
I'm not I'm not a specialist in Dugin. I'm just a guy who really likes Soviet history and the post-Soviet world and have read a little bit about Dugin and have read and have seen and observed the ways in which people in the West have obsessed with him. I'm originally from the United States, from California, Northern California, the Bay Area, and now I live in Tbilisi, Georgia, where I'm here writing and researching and working on some pieces of writing.
Okay. So in case someone who doesn't know who is Dugin, do you think that people even should know who is Dugin?
I don't think it's that important, to be honest with you. It's
So
not that important.
So we are not going to explain who is Dugin. If you are interested who is Dugin, you can go and Google it, but probably you shouldn't.
You,
So, but can you say a couple of words why it's not important to know who is Dugin?
yes, yeah, yeah. So I'll say a few things. So I'll explain a little bit about who he is and explain why it's not important to think too much about him. So Alexander Dugin is someone who was a some kind of dissident from the dissident world who ended up becoming a very obscure, marginal thinker in the posts in the 90s and edited some edited a magazine or a newspaper that was a sort of synthesis of the communist and ultra-right forces in the early 1990s post-Soviet Russia. But he originally comes from this dissident, anti-Soviet kind of world. But in the moment when the nationalists and communists were kind of teaming up together to fight against the Yeltsin administration, there were some sort of like third positionist thinkers who came out of this moment, and he was one of them. But so that's who Dugin is.
So what do you think that Western intellectuals are obsessed about Dugin?
Okay, so very simple. The first reason is because Dugin wrote a book called The Foundations of Geopolitics that some people who were in the military apparatus of the Russian Federation in the late 90s started reading and actively promoting. So what this meant was that there was in the eyes of Westerners, an idea which they thought may be influencing the geopolitical and foreign policy orientation of post-Soviet Russia. And the reason that they started becoming obsessed with it was because in the West, there was, during the Cold War, understandings of the Soviet Union by bourgeois academics was done through something called Kremlinology. So in the United States, for example, Kremlinologists tried to make sense of why Soviet Union was doing all kinds of things based on how the Kremlin internally was organized, meaning, how did Brezhnev and his advisors relate to one another, and what did that mean for the foreign policy or domestic concerns of the Soviet Union. When the Soviet Union collapsed, all these Russia experts sort of maintained Kremlinological thinking and were constantly looking for explanations for why Russia was doing what it's doing without delving into a systemic analysis of the society. So they use Kremlinological thinking, and because of Dugin's connection to some of the people in the military apparatus, they started sort of painting him as this intellectual inspiration to why, for example, Russia went to war with Georgia, or why Russia invaded eastern Ukraine during in the aftermath of Maidan, because it was easier to say that Dugin had some intellectual inspiration among the foreign policy makers and generals than it is to say, maybe there's some other factors at play.
So you think this all is just kind of a big scam?
Yeah, clearly, it's a way. It's the same reason why it's not just a big scam. It's like a misunderstanding of post-Soviet Russia, where everything is about Dugin, who's like a Rasputin-like figure, or there's Surkov, who is in the Kremlin and he's actually the one dictating everything, or every single thing that happens was Putin's doing, without any sort of like attention paid to the systemic ways or the complexities of the society. So Dugin is just like a symbol that represents that for the Westerners, a way to make sense of a complicated situation.
And what do you like to say to people who are obsessed, to intellectuals who are obsessed about Dugin?
Read a few more fucking books. That's what I'd say. Read a few more fucking books. But in all seriousness, I would say, that they need to try and understand the society in ways that don't just involve single individuals, marginal, half-baked fascist academics who, wrote a couple of books, but actually try to look at more of the dynamics in the society. Dugin is like some marginal pseudo-intellectual who is not the one actually inspiring how Russian foreign policy or Russian nationalism even is being created. The only thing I can say, the only reason that maybe Dugin is interesting is because he represents a marginal wing of like post-Soviet Russian far-right imagination and had a small movement called Евразия. And like that is maybe something interesting to like look at to understand how fascists in post-Soviet Russia think. But even amongst fascists, Dugin is marginal because he's more sort of connected with the Western European New Right, and so that makes him, even amongst, I think, the greater world of Russian far right, sort of marginal.
So, okay, whoever came late and joined, our topic today is why Western intellectuals are obsessed about Dugin, but actually we are about to finish because we already answered to the main question. But if you have some question, we can just wait and answer a couple of minutes. Thanks for our guest, Bryan. You made a very good explanation on why Western intellectuals are obsessed about Dugin and why everyone who is obsessed about Dugin should read a few more books and not just be obsessed about Dugin. Okay, I guess we don't have any questions, but if you missed the first part, you can check this later on SoundCloud. I will also save this to Insta Live, where it will be from now on, and I put it later also to YouTube. Thanks for all the guests. Thanks, Bryan. Take care.
До свидания. Пока.